Hey guys, we are in a new podcast studio. This is not my usual apartment. I am so excited to be doing this. I happen to be on vacation in Glasgow and I wanted to record a video for you. So let's get into it. You might have heard that being a guest on someone else's podcast is one of the best ways to grow your own podcast. But why is that the case? And how exactly do you go about being a guest on someone else's podcast? Also, when is the right time to really be a guest? We're going to be covering all of that in this video. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Huete. I'm a professional podcast producer. I've worked on shows like Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel or This Is Dating, which was listed as one of Time Magazine's best podcasts of 2022. Or you might recognize Together Apart with Priya Parker for the New York Times. Either way, here is a complete list of the shows that I have worked on. I've also hosted my own independent podcast before I ever became a professional producer, which is why I created the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator, where people who feel overwhelmed by the tech or just not sure if their idea is good enough, or who feel like I don't know what first step to take to actually create the podcast that I want to make, I help people go from there to actually creating a podcast that builds their thought leadership and eventually becomes something that they can monetize. If that sounds like you will want to download the 10-step guide to launching your podcast. This is the exact framework that I use in the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator, okay? So now, let's get into podcast guesting. So let's talk about why being a guest on someone else's show is such an effective way of promoting your own show. I know most of us think of it as a chance for self-promotion, and I really want to help you reframe it. I think of showing up on someone else's podcast as an opportunity for the transference of trust, okay? Here's what I mean by that. Anytime somebody invites you onto their show, what they're saying to their audience is, I trust this person, like I vouch for this person. And because their audience trusts them, they're already more primed, more open to listening to what you have to say. Now, if you show up and you deliver something valuable, maybe it's a refreshing take, maybe it is a new perspective, maybe it is a framework that you've built of how you think about the world or how you think about a specific topic. If you bring that to the podcast, this audience is more likely to like you, to trust you, and to follow your work. And this is exactly how you build an audience, how you build a client base, and how you build a community. So then the question becomes, when exactly should you be thinking about actively going on other people's podcasts? While there isn't one specific time when you should be on other people's podcasts, there are 3 key moments that I have started to realize these are the main times where it's really effective for you to show up on other people's podcasts, okay? The first is when you've launched a few episodes of your own show. Let's say you have 3 to 5 episodes of your show that are live. You have nothing to sell. You just have a clear perspective and a clear way of thinking about whatever it is that your podcast talks about, whatever topic you are an expert on, you now have some practice speaking about that. So ideally, if you show up on people's podcasts at this phase of your podcasting journey, you will have something interesting to say for that audience. So the first moment is when you have started your podcast, you have a few episodes under your belt, and you're just there to deliver some value. You're not really selling or promoting anything. The second is when you have a really clear call to action. So let's say you go on someone else's podcast and at the end you can say something like, hey, if you are really struggling with this, so whatever topic you all talked about, if you are really struggling with X, listen to my podcast. I'll give you the exact steps, the frameworks that I use to help my clients do Y. Or something along those lines, really to just say, hey, if you have this problem, we solve for that on my podcast in this way. This positions you in a much more strategic way when you are showing up on other people's podcasts. Now, the third really important time to show up on someone else's podcast is when you are about to launch something big. Maybe it's a project, maybe it's your own podcast, maybe it's a book. When you are preparing for your launch, it's really helpful to show up on someone else's podcast and talk about the subject matter, the topic that you are covering in your project. We see this with authors maybe more than anyone else. When an author is coming out with a new book, suddenly you see that person on all of the podcasts that you might listen to. So this is really, really effective because you can tell people to pre-order, you can tell them to join a mailing list, you can basically get them excited so that when the project launches, they can engage fully because they already know what you're about and what you are going to deliver. So we've covered why you should get on other people's podcasts and when the right time to do it is. So now let's talk about the hard part, the how. The very first thing I want to remind you, because this is the biggest mistake that I see people make, don't just go for the biggest shows that you can imagine. What you actually want to be thinking about is who you share an audience with, okay? So it might be a much smaller podcaster, but if you share an audience with them, if you know that your listeners are likely their listeners, that is who you should prioritize, okay? And I think that also takes the pressure off because smaller podcasters are constantly looking for new guests for their podcasts. So you're really solving a problem for them when you say, hey, I'd like to be on your show. Now, the second part of this is pitching effectively. I see a lot of people pitching by saying, hey, I'd really like to come on your show. I get emails like this all the time. And here's the thing. You telling me why you think you should be on my show is all about you. But if you pitch me with some credibility, a clear sense of alignment for what you're talking about and what my audience needs, and then a clear payoff, like what is it that I'm going to gain if you come on my podcast, that is going to solve problems for me and make it so much more likely that I will want you as a guest on my podcast. So the three things that you always want in your pitch is credibility, alignment, and payoff. The first piece is credibility. So why should I trust you to come on my podcast and be a guest? And why should I trust you to share my audience's attention with? Now, if you have credibility in the form of expertise, wonderful. If you have credibility in the form of personal experience, maybe you are making a health and wellness podcast, but you're not actually an expert in any version of health and wellness. You just are super curious about it and you have your own reasons for being curious about it. You should tell me that because that is going to encourage me to want you as a guest on my show. The second piece is alignment. When we talk about alignment, you want to be really explicit about telling me that you know who my audience is and what their problems are. If you listen to anyone's podcast long enough, it becomes really clear that they're solving a problem for their audience. So let's take Nicaila Matthews, for example. Nicaila is a podcaster who talks all about side hustles and turning those side hustles into full-time jobs. So if I were pitching Nicaila, I'll put a link to our episode in the video description below. If I were pitching Nicaila, I would say, hey, Nicaila, I know that your audience really wants to figure out how to take their side hustles and make money from it and eventually turn it into a full-time job. That is exactly what I have done with my side hustle as a podcaster, and I would love to walk your audience through exactly how I did that with practical tools and insights that might help them on their own journeys. So I'm aligning myself with her and her audience and actually helping her audience solve a problem, which takes us to the payoff. The payoff is exactly what the audience will get. So notice I ended that with, I want to help your audience actually get the tips, the tools, the strategies, the insights, whatever, in order to accomplish this for themselves. This is the payoff. So if you can clearly align yourself and tell the host what payoff their audience will get, you are so much better positioned to sit in the guest chair because there is very clear value that you are going to deliver. Now, I know pitching can seem really scary because we run the risk of getting rejected or even ignored. And the truth is, it's going to happen. A lot of people are going to ignore you. Some people might say, no, thank you. That's okay. That doesn't mean you shouldn't pitch. It just means this was your first introduction to this person. Make sure it's a good introduction to this person because I promise you, if you stick with it, eventually you are going to either meet this person or work with this person in some capacity again. So use it as a relationship building tool. Do not take it personally if people don't accept your pitch on the first try or aren't interested or ignore you. It's really, truly not personal. That being said, I know it's scary, and I think this is the exact kind of moment where you want to practice your creative resilience. You want to practice showing up in the way that you can show up, regardless of how other people respond to it. So that's the why, the when, and the how of podcast guesting. And if you've watched this and you're wondering, hey, how do I position myself as a good host myself on my podcast? Then you will want to watch this video on asking really good questions. And after watching this, if you're thinking you'd like to work with me, then I will put a link to my calendar below. It is an opportunity to chat with me about your podcast and learn more about the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator. I will see you in the next video.